Hi, gang. One last sip for the road. One last sip for the road. Hello, everybody. So, the poll question today at Smerconish.com asks, should federal funding be cut from universities like Harvard in response to perceived failures in addressing campus antisemitism? Thank you, Parks Casino, for sponsoring today's poll question at Smerconish.com. This is an amazing story. I love stories like this. 1 year after finishing with the worst record in pro basketball, Detroit is headed to the playoffs for the first time since 2018. Congrats to Detroit. Detroit basketball in the pro basketball playoffs against New York starting this weekend. The Play Gun Lake online sportsbook casino app has you covered. Much, much more to have skin in the game. Much, much more enjoyment and fun comes your way if you're a participant via Play Gun Lake. Detroit baseball also back. Whether Detroit wins or loses, there's always another way to win on the Play Gun Lake Sportsbook and online casino app, the only app that I ever use and recommend to bet sports in the great state of Michigan. Check out live dealers and so much more. Play blackjack, roulette, poker, craps, and hot online slots like Cash Eruption, 88 Fortunes, Cleopatra, all those online slot games. They've also got, predicated on your favorite streaming shows or TV shows, other slot games like Squid Game, Breaking Bad, and Peaky Blinders. 3 winners. So go to playgunlake.com, download the app right now, enjoy all the action and excitement from the casino at your fingertips. You've got to be 21 and in Michigan for Play Gun Lake online casino and sportsbook app. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, as we begin the next 12 years, it is a Wednesday. That means Mark Halpern in the second hour of the program today, and no shortage of news to discuss. Yesterday's poll question and result. Here we go. Should the IRS audit taxpayers of all income levels with equal frequency to ensure fairness and transparency in the tax system? 35,000 plus voted, and it broke 56.43% saying yes. Yes, the IRS should audit taxpayers of all income levels with equal frequency. Had a good guest from the Wharton School yesterday in Professor Ben Sprung-Kaiser. But I would submit that there's more here than meets the eye. I mean, intuitively, you say, well, of course, we've got to look at all income brackets equally because fairness demands that. The yes argument being one of fairness, one of transparency, one of deterrence, right? Equal scrutiny would discourage tax evasion at all levels. If people know only the very high income earners are being audited, then we're going to fuel more cheating, fraud, perhaps error among those who earn less. But the arguments for saying no, there's actually some merit to focusing more on those who are higher income earning include efficiency, include complexity, include resource allocation. I mean, simply stated, there's more to audit among those of higher income. Wage earners, those who are earning a wage, they're not investors, they're earning a wage and their employer is removing whatever their appropriate level of taxes are. There's just less room there for fudging. So when you delve into it, I think there's actually an argument to keep doing what it is they've been doing, which is to audit, target higher income earners at a higher rate. And now, with the added wrinkle of limited resources for the IRS, it makes that argument even more so. The lead story today in my newsletter is, it's from CBS, and it's about the Trump administration now trying to slash the IRS by 40%. And you hear that story and you may say, like, hooray, because who wants to defend the IRS? But it's not in our long-term best interest for reasons that I will explain. Yeah, the IRS is planning to cut up to 40% of its workforce after Tuesday marked the official end of tax filing season, according to an internal memo obtained by CBS News that has circulated among IRS employees this week. So that is, how do I say that? That is one of 3 stories today on this Wednesday where I believe the administration is wrong on the merits, but benefiting politically. Another is the so-called, I'm doing the finger thing for those who are listening and not watching, the so-called Maryland dad who is sitting in prison in El Salvador. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, according to Politico, either a wrongly accused Maryland father or an illegal alien and suspected MS-13 gang member, depending entirely on your politics. Either way, he definitely got mistakenly deported back to his native El Salvador last month in a breach of 2019 U.S. court rulings that said it was not safe for him to return there. And this political hot potato now has resulted in today, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland apparently flying to Latin America, hoping that he's going to visit the same jail that we've all seen on prison, where Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, stood outside the jail cell and made her latest TV pitch. The Times today, not in the newsletter, because candidly, I saw it too late and I wanted to use Tom Friedman from the Times. But there's a 5-person byline story in the New York Times today about what the Times was able to learn of the 238 who were removed by the Trump administration thus far. And the bottom line is that some of the 238 are bad seeds, or as President Trump would say, bad hombres. But with regard to many of them, they couldn't document that they were members of that gang, much less that they'd been involved in criminal activity. Quote, yet most of the men do not have criminal records in the United States or elsewhere in the region. Beyond immigration offenses, a New York Times investigation has found, and very few of them appear to have any clear documented links to the Venezuelan gang. So this is a much discussed piece in political circles today. And with regard to the Maryland dad, again, the air quotes, on Monday, President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador forcefully backed the administration during a visit to the White House. He flatly rejected the idea of returning a Maryland man who had been wrongly deported to El Salvador, despite the Supreme Court's instructions that the United States take steps to bring back the migrant. So there's that story. And the third story is what's going on relative to Harvard, which involves today's poll question. Early this morning, I sent an email to my CNN producer. It's not even daybreak on a Wednesday, but I always like to say, here's what I'm thinking of for the Saturday show. And the email that I sent to Catherine, my producer, said this: I think Donald Trump is wrong on the merits on the two most pressing political stories as I write this: Harvard and Kilmar Abrego Garcia. But politically speaking, I think he has the upper hand on both. Democrats are forced to defend an institution most Americans see as elitist, Harvard, as Senator Van Hollen is headed to El Salvador to argue for a guy who is not an American at a time when the borders are remarkably stable, which Trump promised. And then I added to that the third element with the tax story when I sent out a tweet this morning. See if you agree with this. I said 3 stories dominate the news today. In each, Donald Trump is wrong on the merits. Trump is wrong on the merits, but benefiting politically. 1, defunding Harvard. 2, not facilitating the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I'm using the facilitating word deliberately because it's in the legal opinion. And 3, reducing the IRS workforce by 40%. And then in my tweet, I said, wrong, wrong, and wrong. And then I said, cheers, applause, USA, USA. Because I think he benefits in each instance politically. With regard to today's poll question, let me shift to that now. Having spoken extensively about Trump versus law firms, Trump versus the media, Trump versus the academia, I see this as part of a larger narrative of Trump seeking successfully so far to stifle dissent. He is threatening to eliminate Harvard's tax-exempt status, following the Ivy League school's refusal to implement a policy change demanded by his administration. Yesterday in social media, he said perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired sickness. That's what he said. Why is he doing it? Okay, presumably, the stated purpose of the White House is that Harvard was slow to react to anti-Semitism post the 10/7 attack by Hamas on Israel, and the reaction on campuses to Israel's response to that attack. I think I said that clearly. And by the way, others, one of whom is going to join me in the third hour of today's radio program, Yair Rosenberg, say that's all a pretense. Writing in The Atlantic, Rosenberg said the Trump administration wants you to know that it's just looking out for Jews. In recent weeks, the White House has cited anti-Semitism as the motivation for many of its controversial moves, whether deporting foreign students who allegedly engaged in pro-Hamas activism or threatening to pull millions of government dollars from Ivy League schools. Shalom, Columbia, quipped the White House X account after it canceled federal funding to the university over its, quote, failure to protect Jewish students from anti-Semitic harassment. And then writes Yair Rosenberg, but this branding is profoundly misleading. In reality, Donald Trump and his allies have been using anti-Semitism as a pretext to advance a radical agenda that has nothing to do with Jews at all and that most American Jews do not support. And he's not alone in assessing the situation that way. Jacob Miller is a former editor of the Harvard Crimson. I had an essay in the newsletter recently that he wrote where he said, among other things, the expansive nature of these billion-dollar cuts suggests Trump's interest is not narrowly fighting anti-Semitism on campus, but rather neutering universities and their ability to conduct research. Anyone familiar with campus life knows funding cuts will have little effect on Jews' experience at Harvard, besides degrading the quality of research and instruction. Worse, they could set back research significantly and destabilize the academe, one of the institutions in which Jews have historically thrived. Or more simply stated, my buddy Larry Seisler, himself Jewish, says Trump is using Jews as human shields against Harvard and his enemies. Stephen Collinson, I've read a lot of different perspectives. I've heard a lot of different perspectives on this issue. So pardon me while I give you a variety of perspectives. Yeah, I'm doing the weave. Stephen Collinson, those saying the same thing that I've been thinking, and then I tweeted. Those without an Ivy League pedigree often mock the snobbery of the country's most prestigious seats of learning, whose degrees open elite circles off limits to most Americans. And when Trump portrays the esteemed academics of Cambridge, Massachusetts as far-left activists pushing woke policies on race and gender, he's not working in a vacuum. Millions of Americans agree with him. Polls show distrust of higher education institutions, especially among Republicans. I mean, they're easy targets. This is me, not Stephen Collinson now. But, you know, do you remember the hearing? This was sort of Elise Stefanik's star moment when, after the hue and cry across the country about the anti-Semitism that was evident in the protests on college campuses, the encampments and so forth a year ago, then all of a sudden you had the presidents of Penn, MIT, and Harvard summoned to a congressional hearing. And I said on radio and on television as well, I said it in a CNN commentary, that they were eggheads, that they said the right thing, like on the merits, if you really understood what they were saying about the First Amendment and how it is a First Amendment issue on college campuses, but it really isn't a First Amendment issue. I understood what they were saying, but what they missed, nobody slammed the table. Do you remember me saying this? Nobody slammed the table and condemned Hamas. That would be the first. Congresswoman Stefanik, I'm going to answer your question, but may I first condemn the barbarism of Hamas exhibited on 10/7 against innocent Jews. That was despicable, yada, yada, yada. They were terrible. The Penn president is gone. Claudia Gay's gone at Harvard. I think the MIT president is still there. So, yeah, I mean, they're an easy target. Here, one more perspective. The Wall Street Journal. The administration runs off the legal rails. The Trump administration, says the Journal, by ordering Harvard to reduce governance, bloat, duplication, or decentralization. It also orders the school to review all existing and prospective faculty for plagiarism. Why is this, and this is me speaking now, why is this the business of the Trump administration? And to ensure viewpoint diversity. The Journal says these reforms may be worth pursuing, but the government has no business requiring them. Its biggest overreach is requiring viewpoint diversity, which it doesn't define. Does this mean the English department must hire more Republicans or Shakespeare scholars? An external monitor will decide such questions. I did a commentary 2 weeks ago on CNN that I was proud of. I began the show with a commentary, which is normal, and then Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of the Berkeley Law School, was my guest. And I began that commentary by saying the following: first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. You've heard that line before. That was Shakespeare 435 years ago, but it may as well have been Donald Trump in 2025. The line, I said, is often misunderstood. It's not a condemnation of lawyers. It's an acknowledgement of their vital role. The character Dick the Butcher says it. He wants to overthrow the government, and lawyers are obstacles because they represent the rule of law. In other words, lawyers are the backbone of a stable society. Nevertheless, lawyers are an easy target. And then I went through some of the data that talked about the low regard for which we have lawyers, that is, until we need one. Like nurses are at the top, lawyers are at the bottom. No doubt, I said President Trump respects lawyers, and not just Roy Cohn. He respects them the same way Dick the Butcher did. Why else would he put the profession at the top of the list of those he's seeking to stifle? It's because he realizes the unique position lawyers can play in thwarting his agenda. And then I went through all the background of how Trump is bringing so many of these law firms to its knees and offering up pro bono work in support of Trump's agenda in return for Trump not barring them from the courthouse. I mean, this is so crazy and dictatorial. It's amazing. And my point is, it's all part of a bigger pattern. And some people are just cowered into, what do I want to say? Submission. Erwin Chemerinsky, who's a brilliant guy and a great guest from Berkeley, he told the story when he was on with me on CNN, how he circulated a petition to 197 law school deans to sign condemning the Trump administration efforts to punish lawyers. And only 79 of them would do so. Among those that wouldn't, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Chicago, Penn, Virginia, Duke, Michigan, Columbia, NYU, and Northwestern wouldn't sign the petition, wouldn't stand up to the administration. And so what's going on at Harvard is part of a bigger narrative. What's going on with the law firms is part of a bigger narrative. These are only a few examples of Trump's efforts to stifle dissent. Another would be in the media realm. You know, the way that that ABC so quickly settled with Trump, the way that CBS might settle with Trump, the way that big tech has been brought to its knees, Apple, Meta, Google. So Trump is seeking to silence dissent in each of these fields. And that's what today's poll question relates to. Should federal funding be cut from universities like Harvard in response to perceived failures in addressing anti-Semitism? I think it's all a pretense. I'm in the same category of Yair Rosenberg and Jacob Miller and my buddy Larry. I think it's a pretense here for the reasons that I've stated. I have long thought that Harvard with its endowment, Stanford with its endowment, should tap into those endowments. I'm not sure why they even charge for tuition. It seems to me that those schools have so damn much money in reserve, they don't even need to charge for tuition. But I worry now, in the here and now, that research is going to be impacted. The cures that could otherwise be discovered are going to get lost in this political kerfuffle. And I think that the administration is violating the First Amendment rights of those at Harvard. But to go back to where I began and to go back to my tweet earlier this morning, by the way, I never remember to say, follow me on X, follow me on Twitter. We promote all of our guests there. And when I've got something unique to say, like I do today, I make sure that I take my message to Twitter, to X. The president's wrong, but as of this moment in time, he is playing a winning political hand on the issues I've identified. Chris Holland flying to El Salvador and arguing in support of the so-called Maryland father is a loser, because most Americans are going to look at that footage of Kristi Noem in front of that jail cell And yes, stereotype, and maybe there's racism involved in some of this, but when it's Kristi Noem doing a photo op again in front of that cell full of individuals all tatted to the max, I think many Americans bristle and like, damn, I'm glad those guys are not in our country. As I tweeted, 3 stories dominate the news today. In each, Donald Trump is wrong on the merits, but benefiting politically. Defunding Harvard, not facilitating the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and reducing the IRS workforce by 40%. Wrong, wrong, and wrong. Cheers, applause, USA, USA, USA. Go vote on today's poll question at Smerconish.com. I think it's a winner. I tried to simplify it. It's a bigger story. Should federal funding be cut from universities like Harvard in response to perceived failures in addressing campus anti-Semitism? I am a no vote for all the reasons I've just explained. Like and subscribe, my friends on YouTube, and set yourself up for notifications. We're about to hit another milestone as we tick up our followers on YouTube. So if you're not a subscriber, become one. You know, it's free and it's easy. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.